the public financial management reform strategy, which is every 3-year decline into a priority action plan. So this is the context. And here in Togo, as Sophie present, the budget is mainly driven. There are 3 main documents that usually are used to elaborate the annual budget. The first document that is used to elaborate the budget is the PRSP, what we call here the SCAP. SCAP means the strategy for boosting growth and promoting employment. It is a 5-year strategy. After that, we have some sectoral strategies, and we also have the medium-term expenditure frameworks. And these 3 different documents are supposed to be used when elaborating the annual budget. That is what is supposed to be done. But in fact, in reality, there is few links between SCAP, sectoral strategies, MTF, and budget. It makes that when budgets are elaborated, you just realize that the commitment that have been taken in the MTF or in the PRSP are not taken into consideration. If you take the case of Togo, related to the social sector ministry, the PRSP has taken a commitment to allocate 37.5% of the state budget to social sectors. But in 2014, social sector ministry just received 27% of the state budget. And in 2013, it was just 24. And usually, health and social affairs ministries are the ministries that are the most affected. If you take these 2 ministries, you will first observe that they have usually very small budgets. If you take the case of the health ministry, the share part of the state budget that is allocated to health ministry have been divided by 2 in quite 5 years, in 6 years. And another element that you observe when you take these 2 ministry budgets is that a huge part of their budget is used to salaries. So there is quite nothing for investment. There is quite nothing for policy implementation. There is quite nothing for projects. Another characteristic of these 2 ministries is that they have very weak disbursement capacity. It means that even the small part of the state budget that are allocated to the ministry are not completely used. So usually when we discuss with the expert of the Ministry of Finance, when we ask them why they are not willing to increase the budget of these different ministries, they give us 3 different reasons. The first reason is that line ministry budgets are not well elaborated, according to them. The second reason is that line ministries don't give good reasons to increase their budgets. It means that even when they are elaborated their budget, they don't link these budgets to their strategies or to their MTF. And the last reason is that line ministry don't spend the previous year budget. It means that if you were unable to spend what has been given you to the previous year, don't ask us to increase your budget. You should at least spend what we have given to you in order to ask us to give you more. Why are we working? Why are we engaged in the budget process? Our main goal while decided to work on budget here is to help the increase of the share part of the national budget allocated to social affairs ministry and to health ministry. That is really the reason why we have decided to work on the budget process with these two ministries. And to do that, we think that the first thing is to improve their budgets. For us, if you want to improve their budgets, we have to work on two different elements. The first element, we have to help them to elaborate budgets that are more in line with sectoral strategies. That is what we have to do. And the second one is to help them just have a better budget. What we think is that if we increase their capacity to elaborate a better budget, of course, they will have an influence on budget allocation. And that will include important projects for children in the budget. Our engagement in the budget process here in Togo mainly has three different pillars, as you can see. These are our three main pillars. These are really the elements that we think we can bring in the discussions, we can bring to that ministries. The first one is the concept and the tools. These concepts and tools are elaborated and are used to train ministry staffs on budgets. That is our first pillar. Elaborating concept, elaborating tools, and using them to organize trainings. Our second pillar is technical assistance. What we think is that trainings alone are not sufficient. We should, after the training, provide these ministries with technical assistance during the whole budget cycle, so that when they are elaborating their budget, we give them what they need as technical assistance. We elaborate their budget with them, and we show them how they concretely have to do. And our last pillar is about monitoring and evaluation, reporting, procurement, and disbursement. So it is basically helping the ministry to better use what they will receive from the government. These are our three main pillars, and these are basically what we are doing, what we are intending to do here, because we haven't started for the moment. Here you have the budget cycle in Togo. It is not so different to what have been presented by Sophie, and as you will see after, we have an engagement that is made at the parliament level, but I won't speak about it during this presentation. This is mostly about advocacy based on the approved budget. And we, in this budget cycle, as you see, we are trying to identify what can be the best entry points, where our technical assistant can be the more effective. And we have identified two entry points for the moment. I think these entry points can be, the number can be increased, but for the moment we are more focused on two entry points. The first entry point is during the budget estimates. It means here when the preliminary budget is estimates. At that moment, we provide concrete technical assistance to the ministry so that they really know how to elaborate their budget. That is what we intending to do. The second entry points will be here during the budgetary conferences. In many countries, budgetary conferences are these conferences where budgets are discussed among experts. It is in that moment that the amounts that are allocated to different ministries are either validated or just negotiated. And we provide line ministries with technical assistance so that they can negotiate and defend their budgets, because if you go to these conferences without strong arguments to negotiate and defend your budget, for sure the expert of the Ministry of Finance will reduce it. So you before going there, you should have all the elements necessary for you to discuss and to negotiate it. As I say it at the beginning of my presentation, our project have for the moment has not started because we will have presidential elections here in 2 months, and our project has been delayed at the request of the ministry because of these presidential elections. So I hope that after the election we will start discussing again with the ministry to see when we can start working with them on that project. And I think it's the reason also why maybe we will identify some other entry points. Challenges and opportunities. For me, I think my biggest challenge here with this project is an institutional and political economy risk. I think if the minister keeps delaying the project, it will be difficult for me to start doing something. So for the moment, this is what I see here as the biggest challenge here. But besides this challenge, I think there are also some other opportunities. And the first one is the fact that here in Togo, we have an interagency donor group working on public finance. And I have started discussing with them to see how they can be integrated in that project, so that what we are doing is integrated in a more broad approach. And the opportunity here, as I was saying, is so to involve other partners like the World Bank, like IMF, like the EU to complement what UNICEF is doing. The second opportunity I see here is to build some relationship with Minister of Finance, because while discussing with Minister of Finance experts, you see that they are interested on having better budgets coming from line ministries. So if they feel that we can contribute to the improvement of the budgets that are elaborated by the line ministries, I think we can build a kind of win-win agreement. The last opportunity I see here is to build on Ministry of Finance support to medium-term expenditure framework. I think medium-term expenditure framework can be an opportunity for us to start working, to start including in the budget elaboration process all the priorities that comes from these two ministries and that are in their sectoral strategies. So briefly said, that is what I have prepared for you today. I hope that the discussion we will have will provide you with more information about what you may have as questions, and that your feedback also will help us to improve our projects. So Sophie and Nima, for me it's okay.
Thank you.
So we have a lot of nice comments and bits of advice for Togo, which is fantastic. And we also have a couple of questions. If any of you who also have further thoughts, you can email Albert. And next we have Mexico on a slightly different approach. Unlike Togo, which is working with partner line ministries in areas where capacity has been overlooked by the World Bank. Mexico works with the Ministry of Finance at helping, as I understand it, helping ensure that there is a correct baseline for the amount that is actually spent on children. And with that, we have Erica presenting, and I look forward to hearing it.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, can you see the presentation, the PowerPoint? Great, thanks.
Hello, did you hear me here? Okay, so, bueno, hi everyone. I'm Fernanda Paredes. I am the Social Policy and Budgeting Officer in Mexico Country Office. So, should I start or we will?
Yes, please.
Okay. As Erika mentioned, she won't be able to present because we have to split off to cover everything. So, first of all, let me just say that all the previous presentations have been very interesting and would be useful for our work here. This presentation will focus on the Mexico Country Office strategy to influence government spending on children and generate engagement in the budget process. Also, we will briefly mention the methodology to identify and estimate the public spending on children, and then outline in more detail our cooperation with the Ministry of Finance, the Secretaría de Hacienda and Crédito Público here in Mexico, and finally just mention the tools we create to encourage the investment on children with other strategic key actors. I would prefer to give all the presentation and then answer the questions and doubts if necessary. So. Well, just as context, in Mexico, despite large federal investment in programs for children, such as the widely known conditional cash transfer program Oportunidades, or the recently scaled-up public scheme insurance Seguro Popular, there was no official data on how much the government spent on children in total, nor any analysis of how this spending is distributed across groups of children, types of programs, or categories of rights. So, in response to an organizational focus on social budgeting, we saw that the country could benefit from increased information about how it spends on children as a first step towards improving this investment over time. Overall, the goals were to generate knowledge on spending on children in a way that we could generate credibility of and establish UNICEF as a player in this arena, and ensure that this knowledge could guide the process of developing a systematic and coordinated effort within the federal government to monitor spending on children. Also knowing that other UNICEF offices in the region have carried out exercises to measure the spending on children's rights, we analyze the different methodologies and define one specific for the Mexican budgetary cycle. So, so the first step was the establishment of a baseline, because this allows us to monitor this investment over time, make it more efficient, effective, and transparent, and equitable in the future. Because if we didn't know how much it was, we can enter into the discussion of whether we are spending well. So as a result, UNICEF country office here in Mexico launched an initiative to seek commitments from key actors to improve spending on children in Mexico, beginning with the convocation of a range of factors to define a way forward and guide the technical inputs to the process. We also involved the civil society, other international agencies who work in this field, and academic in the area of public finance to comment on our methodology once we have the preliminary results. This was also important to ensure that the report we presented had greater technical strength and support. We also met with actors who had been involved in the recently presented case of developing a gender earmark to learn from their experience in order to avoid some of the challenges they faced and discuss how the creation of an earmark could be useful in improving the fulfillment of child rights. Once we had the initial findings, we made contact with the Secretaría de Hacienda and Crédito Público, the Ministry of Finance, to discuss the findings of the report and explore the possibility of further partnership, which is the point 5. After this, we agreed with the ministry to sign an agreement at a joint presentation of our study, whereby the Ministry of Finance would set in motion a plan to systematize the process of determining how much the federal budget dedicates to the fulfillment on child rights, and then evaluate the efficiency and equity of this spending through collaborative actions and technical assistance. Just to let you know, in Mexico, the federal budget has had a system of earmarks for many years. They are around 10. For spending on priority groups such as women, spending on indigenous groups, spending on rural areas, etc. Their system requires that each ministry to submit as part of their annual budget request a proposal for which budget lines should be included in the corresponding earmark. As in 2011, we combined them to include in the federal budget a specific earmark for children, or it's like a child spending market of like a list or annex into the budget law. And when they agreed to include it, they also decide to use our methodology, which is to say, instead of including a list of budgetary programs and their corresponding budget amount, the list is the list of programs is linked to the weighted budget amounts. So now, every year, the program must submit to the Ministry of Finance their budget projects for the next fiscal year, along with a list of programs for each priority group and the corresponding weights that allow us to determine what percent of a program is dedicated to women, indigenous, or etc. So this allows us for a much more accurate calculation. We also participate in the meeting, providing technical assistance and explaining the human rights-based approach specifically for children, with every ministry that has social spending identifying the earmark to explain both the rationale for the child spending earmark and the methodology. This is a way for us to engage in the budgetary cycle in Mexico in the phase of formulation. Well, also, all of this information is public and is in the budget law. What is not public is the justification that Hacienda requests from each ministry to explain its weights. That is, which of the criteria proposed by UNICEF were used to calculate the weights. And just to say that in reality, the budgetary programs in this annex are not actually coded, in the sense that you can go into the overall budget and see a mark for spending on children, but rather the list of programs weighted amounts is included in the budget into the law as an annex, and it's just that a standalone list. Let me just, is here, that you can see in the slide that I'm showing. In terms of the methodology, we follow 5 steps to identify the amount of spending dedicated to children in each program to form a first baseline. In a minute, we will go into more detail on the process we use, but we identify the key lines in the budget whose founder completely or in part seem to contribute to the fulfillment of child rights, direct or in an indirect way, through an online mechanism that would allow us to assess what percentage of spending could be determined to be for children, right? Well, what's beyond the first baseline of the partnership with Ministry of Finance, we have some innovations or progress. Well, as I mentioned, we have the specific earmark for children that use our methodology, and every year the Ministry of Finance require our technical assistance. Also, in 2013, the Congress make the child spending earmark mandatory in the all subsequent federal budgets law. Also, one innovation is that at the subnational level, where public spending tends to be less transparent and with fewer oversight or reporting mechanisms, since 2013, UNICEF worked with 4 state governments to ensure that a child rights perspective and corresponding earmark was included in their state-level budgets. We also work with to systematize the municipal child budget methodology that was developed and implemented in Puebla, a city with a population of 2.7 million, and 1 million are under 18. And this was launched in 2014, as well as similar analysis for the municipality of Pachuca, which is currently the chair of the Mexican Child-Friendly Cities Network. Well, also, in order to generate awareness and extend the allies in the PF4C and for establishing a network of experts to support this initiative, UNICEF started working with a local but recognized think tank, the National Institute for Competitiveness, IMCO, to include these measures of child spending using UNICEF methodology as one of the criteria in its state budget competitiveness index. Which is published annually. So this index was presented for the first time with UNICEF proposed criteria for child-friendly budgets in November, and will be applied to all the state budgets in 2015. This alliance with IMCO was aimed to increase UNICEF credibility with local actors in the government and to create enforcement or something. We also have Info Niñez, which is a website designed by the country office, which contains all the statistical and programmatical information about children. Info Niñez has a module on social investment on children that is useful for track and monitor the spending on children continuously. It also permits us to analyze it by group of rights, per capita spending on children, among others. We, following our efforts to improve the targeting of social programs and in collaboration with the government to achieve more equitable government spending, UNICEF, in partnership with the UNDP, is carrying out an analysis of the equity of social spending on children in Mexico. This analysis is derived from the report of Human Development in Mexico from 2011 that analyzed the equity of public spending for all the population. So by now we have the initial findings, and we will share it in a peer review committee and more or less do the same strategy that we use with the other report. Well, as I mentioned, a Children's Rights Commission in Congress was installed in 2013, and UNICEF participated in workshops at the Congress about the earmark during the budgetary discussions in the Congress. Well, this is most all our work here, but the innovations approach included that we adapt in a methodology using in other countries in the region to the Mexican context. We introduce a topic and a methodology that have never been explored in Mexico, and ensuring its uptake, including a rights-based approach, and to create an accurate baseline to analyze the amount and estimate of the spending for children. We also try to extend the work to the subnational level and start with the equity spending analysis. That's most of all that we have done in this area. I don't know, I hope that I was clear enough. I don't know if anyone have any doubts or if any aspect where we can go deeper. We are more than willing to answer to the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernanda, Erika. And yes, we got a couple of questions, but we're gonna answer them at the discussion part after the presentation from Armenia.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So,
we'd also like to thank you all for sticking around. It's great that we still got so many people listening, and quite impressive that you're that interested and very positive.
So, Arthur, are you online?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm just uploading your file, presentation, and you just take over as presenter, then you can move the PowerPoint as well.
Okay. Okay, I cannot see my presentation, but I can start. Okay, it's coming. Okay, everyone. Hi. I will try to be as short as possible due to the time, and the experience that I'm going to share with you relates to the middle income country experience, and this describes the process of our engagement in the MTF and program budgeting processes. It quite well resonates with Sophie's presentation and presentations that we heard earlier. In a nutshell, from early 2000, the government of Armenia started large-scale PFM reforms, and basically two of the pillars of the broad PFM reforms were directed at the establishment of the sound PFM processes, and also they implied a gradual transition from a line item to a program budgeting format. And as a result, from mid-2000s, the very first MTF was developed, which was for the 3 years, and it's now fully institutionalized process, and it's updated each year. The key point that we realized is that MTF in Armenia sets a very strict budget ceilings for all the sectors and programs, meaning that it's very difficult to play beyond the ceilings. Throughout the process, and as we also learned that's the case in many other countries, the technical assistance has been provided to the government, mostly to the Ministry of Finance by British Defeat and GIZ. However, they mostly focused on the strengthening the capacity of the Ministry of Finance staff. And that was one of the clear problems that we realized. And line ministries, including those of UNICEF primary interest, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Protection, Ministry of Education, and others were somehow overlooked. So it created some imbalance between the capacities, the stronger capacity on the side of the Ministry of Finance and relatively weaker capacity on the side of line ministries. As a result, we realized that it affected the child-related policies, and consequently, it affected also the child-related budget spending. So, how we involved in the process, and again, I want to link it up with Sophie's point that for a very long time, our engagement was in a way limited to post factum. Quads and quads traditional UNICEF engagement, when we commented mostly on the state budget allocation, advocating for the increase of spending in different sectors. We also commissioned some, I wouldn't say very ad hoc, but fragmented researches that pointed out the importance of financial aspect, but they were never framed as a big one strategy. Back in 2010, we commissioned two papers, the overview of Armenia MTF 1113 and the impact of the public finance management system on children. So both of the documents heavily focused on the child-related programs and the way PFM broadly and the MTF process specifically affects child-related programs and funding. I need to mention that in Armenia, at least, the PFM is the highest level where the planning and policies are, for the first time, are matched with the real money and the government spending. Why we commissioned the paper, and what does the MTF have to do with children? So these two papers clearly revealed the necessity of UNICEF to engage into the PFM businesses because of serious implications. We also learned that gradually the importance of annual budget, the annual budget lost its importance vis-a-vis MTF. And in reality, if any budgeting initiative is not part of the MTF, then it's very difficult, if not impossible, to introduce it into the annual budget cycle. So it basically has almost zero chances to appear. Of course, there are some exceptions, but in reality, the fiscal discipline in Armenia tries to be very strict. So the annual budget process becomes I wouldn't say very artificial, but the space is really limited there, especially for the new initiatives. Well, how we begin the process. So in 2011, we became, right after the commissioning of the paper, we became the part of the donor coordination group on PFM, composed of various players, the usual suspects like IFIs, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, EU, GIZ, and the others. So that was the very first time when we joined the club, in a way. And in one of the very first meetings, one of the topics of the discussion was poor submissions from the line ministries, from all line ministries. And that's where the place where the group suggested or offered UNICEF, given the mandate, to support them. And that's where we immediately volunteered to help at least the group of social sector line ministries with whom we have very good partnership relations, with the aim to improve their MTF submissions and also their program budgeting formats. So we did it through the on-the-job trainings and also the technical assistance. I want to emphasize that we volunteered at the time without really knowing where we go and what will be the consequences, but we clearly realized that it is needed and it is required. That's why we decided to help. But it was very clear for us that we didn't know at the time what will be the consequences and what will be the results. And there was a bit of a panic at the time and uncertainty. And the first immediate reaction for us to bring some international expertise from Oxford Policy Management, and we brought an expert who organized a training for the several line ministry staff. And then we openly approached our partner ministries with the proposal to support them. And back in 2012, only the Ministry of Education replied positively. And it seems that at the time there was a recognition inside the ministry that the process is quite important, and they approached us for the support. So what we did basically, we hired a couple of national experts, PFM experts, and interestingly enough, these people were formerly employed by the Ministry of Finance, and later on they joined various international organizations. Some became freelance experts. So with the help of these experts, we worked together, including some UNICEF staff members, on the improvement of the MTF submission of the Ministry of Education, and the result of which was that submission was considered as the best among the social sector line ministries. There was an open recognition that the quality of submission was significantly improved. Later on, during 2013-14, because of that experience, our other partners, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, also approached us for the support, and we did it exactly the same way as we did for the education, mostly through the on-the-job training, where UNICEF staff was also involved. Later on, we expanded our engagement into an area which was not quite traditional for us. We started cooperation with the Ministry of Territorial Administration and the Ministry of Finance on the issue of the Territorial Development Fund and its reflection in the MTF process, which basically aims at reducing the territorial inequalities, including those in social sectors. And that's what we are working at the moment on. So on the MTF, I don't want to repeat what Sophie already mentioned, but for us, it's the strategic moment when the plans and the budgets comes together. So when so what the real intention of the government to finance and to implement is reflected in the MTF. And I think it created quite an interesting discourse. In reality, it is a very useful tool for the line ministries to justify, instead of justifying their spending, as they were doing during the within the line item budgeting logic, to justify and to link the available resources and to justify that the available resources are spent effectively and efficiently. So that's a completely different type of logic compared to the traditional line item budgeting. In turn, for the Ministry of Finance, it seriously limits the scope of their engagement, because they don't have a legitimate right just to cut the request of the line ministries for subjective reasons. They can cut in reality, but they need to strongly justify the reasons for that, and they need to point out why the proposed budgets, whether the proposed budget is detached from the realization of the ministry's policies and priorities. So they are serving as a safeguards that has to ensure the link between the priorities and the proposed budget allocations. So in reality, it's a completely different ballgame, where the line ministries are in a more favorable position rather than they were before, because to justify spending is not that easy, because other ministries are doing exactly the same job. In terms of the cycle, I don't want to point out on the other elements such as reporting, audit, and others, but the moment of when the strategic planning transition into the budget preparation, the MTF is the process that links these two processes together. It's before the budget preparation, it somehow overlaps the cycle-wise, but that's exactly the moment where the money is linked to the plans and the policies. I want to emphasize some of the achievements, then I will focus more on the lessons, which is quite interesting. So, as I said, the submission of the Ministry of Education was considered as the strongest, and it was the strongest in the consequent years. Directly as a result of our support to the Ministry of Health, one of the areas that we were advocating for a very long time, nutrition, and especially the awareness component, has appeared for the very first time in the MTF submission of the Ministry of Health. That's we also considering as quite a big success. And the third pillar, the support that we provided to the Ministry of Labor and Social Issues, also linked to the ongoing program of UNICEF that we were doing jointly with the World Bank, the reform of integrated social services and all the consequent pillars found their reflection in the new MTF of that ministry, which mostly focused on the introduction of transformative social work and case management and many other elements. So because of our support, that request became stronger, and it was reflected in the MTF, and later on it was also reflected in the annual budget. The other results were, which has to be mentioned, I think, that as a result of our support, the quality of the submissions of the ministries were seriously improved compared to other sectors and other priority programs coming from the economic sectors and the others. And also, we helped the ministry to strengthen the result framework of the MTF by introducing a number of results indicators and result-oriented structure, and that's because of our natural capacity and the similarity of the processes that we do as part of UNICEF usual programming. I want to emphasize one of the unexpected results, which is quite interesting. When we supported the Ministry of Education, it was not in a very traditional way. So in reality, we became a part of the club, and we became a party with vote. I wouldn't say with voting power, but we somehow became a group of intra-ministerial discourse and discussing on the budgeting issue, and that helped us a lot to advocate for the areas of our primary interest, a very equity-focused dimensions, and link it up with the expenditures. So that I need to say that was one of the unexpected results, and we didn't expect that kind of dimension when we started the engagement. So it helped us to openly discuss with the ministries our own priorities, framing them as part of the bigger MTF discussions. I want to emphasize some of the specific lessons that would be, in my view, quite interesting to hear for other country offices. In Armenia, the MTF committee, the highest body that decides, basically, we realized that there are some very interesting features. So they do prefer one-time initiatives, even if they are big, vis-a-vis a long-term commitments, even if they are small. And that's kind of unofficial practice. So it means that not only the Ministry of Finance, but also the MTF committee prefers a one-time spending vis-a-vis a long-term obligation. So once we realize that, I think it helps us a lot to properly advocate for the areas of our interest. A second element that I want to emphasize relates to the new initiatives. One of the most difficult things is to introduce the new initiative into the MTF and the budgeting processes. And the likelihood of these new initiatives to appear is considerably increasing when they are somehow co-financed from the third parties. Could be donors, could be other players. As an example, I can bring that the budget support mandatory benchmarks that normally IFIs or European Union is using, helps a lot to promote the specific new initiative. Another lesson, and here I want to reiterate the point of Sophie, is that MTF calendar is quite important part. Everything is linked to this strict calendar. So if it needs to be a timely frame. So if we are late or the ministries are late, then the chances are lost, and the next chance comes at the minimum next year, if not later. As a golden rule, we realize that the initiatives that are politically supported and technically sound, the combination of these two factors is, in a way, a formula of success. So they have the best chances to appear in the MTF and respectively in the budget. Again, for the new budget programs to appear for the first time, it's one of the biggest challenges. But once they appear in the budget, the expansion, they go to a completely different procedure. So once they appear in the budget, then to increase the size of the program or a budgeting initiative becomes easier, because there's a different screening procedure applies for the new ones, and the different one applies to the already existing ones. So our strategy is to start small, to find a place in the budget and the MTF, and then gradually expand it. Another set of lessons that I introduced, which in my view will be also quite interesting to hear for the audience, is that MTF-wise, there is one approach that is frequently used, that is value for money. So it's not new for us, and this approach stipulates to look at the quality, quantity, and timeless of a given service or a program. So they may appear together or alone, but for any new or existing service or program, the MTF process looks at this looks at that from these four perspectives. Another interesting point is that MTF distinguishes a lot between mandatory and discrete commitments. So when PFM specialists, as Sophie was saying in a harsh way, they say commitment, they mean financial commitment. So they really mean money. In this logic, I think the legislation, including the one that is even imperatively defined, is read as implicit and not the explicit process. So there are many so-called unfunded mandates. That's why the MTF process, the obligations that are coming from the Constitution and the main laws are mostly viewed as mandatory obligations, while the government decrees and other stuff is looked from the discretionary perspective. And that's a completely different ballgame, and is quite different from the legislative logic perspective. I want to point out on the fact that phenomena of budget austerity, which was mentioned a lot, and the crises are happening a lot, is somehow combined, in our view, with the constant push for the governments to look for sound investments, and that's where the opportunity comes. So the strong proposal from a line ministry, even if the macro framework is constrained, may appear. So the chances are always there. So it depends on the priorities and opportunity and the particular moment. But the governments are in a constant look for strong investments. And investments, they read an investment, any type of spending, not necessarily the economic, not only those of economic nature, but also the social ones. I think another lesson that is very interesting, that in our view there is always a niche in terms of PFM for UNICEF and its partners, because what we realize that IFIs cannot fully cover the floor, and there are very interesting niches, especially through our partner ministries with whom we work on a daily basis. Indeed, the MTF process is a long-term commitment, and we should not anticipate very quick wins, although they may appear, but the results are quite significant. And we also realize that starting small is not a bad option. We can start small and then expand later on. And I think to conclude my presentation, I want to say that it's really a learning process, and the learning by navigating through the there is a famous quote of Edgar Morin, who said that we should learn to navigate on a sea of uncertainties, sailing in and around the islands of certainty. And that's exactly what happened with us during this process. I think this much on my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Artur.
Okay, so Beatrice, I think you're here. We've got a couple of minutes for you to quickly make the comment that about the engagement in the budget process in Timor-Leste. So we've got another country offers view. So Beatrice, we're going to unmute you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Oh, perfect. I'll try to make it 2 minutes. I'm actually not in Timor-Leste anymore. I moved to Tanzania, but it's a little bit late for them, so I'm trying to still bring their message. So I'll just quickly give you a brief introduction and context of the country. So Timor-Leste is a very small, it's about 1 million people, post-conflict country, but it's a rather rich one. The petroleum fund balance reached $16 billion in August, and I expect it to be much higher by now. So the country is on the paper already a middle-income one, but the reality is actually made of widespread and pervasive poverty. So in this context, in our view, engaging with the budget process has become absolutely critical to leverage resources towards human capital development and enhance not just quantity but also quality of spending. The situation in Timor is the following. Allocation to social sectors are well below international benchmarks. The bulk of resources is directed to infrastructure, despite the very poor budget execution. The quality of sector plans, as has been pointed out by several colleagues today, is very poor. And the budget structure has practically no link with results or performance. So in this context, based on what we see being one of UNICEF's most distinctive value added, which is our deep knowledge and strong relationship with line ministries, we started engaging in the budget process with the line ministries, specifically with the Ministry of Health. And we started with evidence-based planning and budgeting at the district level, partnering with an Indonesian university, adapting their model to the Timor-Leste context. I'm not going to talk about that because we have no time, but I just want to say that we became a bit more ambitious, and we came to realize that the engagement with the Ministry of Finance was essential. So we were a bit daring there. And we based on Timor-Leste Strategic Development Plan, which assigned the Ministry of Finance the responsibility of creating an integrated system across the government for planning, budgeting, and execution. So we engaged with them based on these tasks that they have assigned by the national plan, and supported the initiation of a South-South cooperation with Malaysia on outcome-based budgeting approach, which is an approach developed on the integrated results-based management model, for those who are familiar with it. So in the context of operationalizing the strategic development plan of Timor and the sector plans, social sector plans, basically the OBB approach is expecting to enhance the linkages between the policy formulation, the development planning, and the budgeting. So linking allocations basically to programs and results, including results for children. So practically, what did we do? It's for us, we realized that the public financial management arena is very crowded with big players, but we still started by trying to engage the Ministry of Finance through workshops and meetings, introducing the idea of outcome-based budgeting and public finance for children, and exploring possible entry points. What we have done, and that's our big lessons learned, is to engage both the Ministry of Finance and the line ministries at the same time. So in these initial consultations, we have invited key planning and budgeting officials from both line ministries and the Ministry of Finance. And we discovered that in Timor-Leste's history, that was almost the first time, probably the first time, that they found themselves around the table talking about allocations for children and discussing issues around budgeting and planning together in an open and cooperative manner. So in the same spirit, we put together a delegation of planning and budgeting officers for Ministry of Finance and line ministries to go to Malaysia and learn about the outcome-based budgeting model. Now, the big challenge for the Timor-Leste office is, of course, to bring forward the process. But the Ministry of Health, as far as I know, if that's still the case, volunteered for piloting and is having a very strong support by the Ministry of Finance. And once again, this is our big lessons learned. So if you put those two together, Ministry of Finance and line ministries, a very much higher chance of making a change. So then we have lots of other things, costing and nutrition policy costing and some other things, but I don't think we have time now for that. So I hope that's enough for my 2 minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Beatrice. That's fantastic. So as you guys can, well, as all of you have heard, we've had 4 different examples of four different examples of the way countries at different economic levels and different political structures all engage in the budget process. Now, Nima has some housekeeping, quickly.
Yeah, thank you. So we are recording this webinar session. We're going to post it on the PF4C Committee of Practice later if you want to listen or follow the discussion part, if you want to leave the webinar right now.
But don't leave.
Don't leave.
Please don't leave. Anyway, yes, and if maybe you want to watch it again, this is super exciting stuff. Okay, so we've grouped some of the questions together, and I'm going to address some of them, and then if you've got any more questions that you'd like to direct to any of the 4 presenters we now have, and by that I mean Arta from Armenia, Albert from Togo, Fernanda or Erica from Mexico, and Beatrice, who was talking about Timor-Leste. Okay, first thing to remember is budgets are always scarce. It doesn't matter, frankly, which country you are. Unless you're Saudi Arabia, the resources are going to be scarce. So it's vital that you link these policies to the MTEF and the budget. Now, this leads into my next point. A lot of the questions you've raised have been about, for example, recurrent expenditure in Zimbabwe being 92% of the budget. There's just not sufficient money for child spending. Okay, number one, there's never going to be enough money. Now, how can you increase the revenue? Well, unfortunately, increasing revenue is quite simple. You either have to raise taxes or you borrow. Now, raising taxes, of course, can have a negative impact on parents of children. Borrowing is something you'd also want to think very sensibly about, because if you borrow today, the children of today will be paying back. So make sure whatever you're encouraging a government to borrow to spend on financing for children, that the actual return to these children as adults is sufficient, okay? So always scarce resources, which really makes me stress, link your policies to the MTEF and the budget. Now, given there are scarce policies, scarce resources, what can you do? Well, one of the few successful things you can do is you can reallocate. Now, that is never easy. None of this is easy. But it's important that you look at your partner line ministries' budgets and see where you can find items that perhaps not all the money is spent. Perhaps it's an old item in the budget that isn't necessary anymore. Do you really need an additional school building? Where can we find savings in the current budgets? Remember how I referred to the top down and the bottom up. This is where the bottom up comes in. It's about sensible, intelligent looking at partner ministry budgets. Okay, this sort of links to Beatrice talked a lot about the budget linking to performance and outcome-based budgeting, which you have in Malaysia and you have in Timor-Leste as well. Now, outcome-based budgeting is a fancy name for what most budgets should do. You should actually, in a budget, link the input, i.e. the amount of money, to an activity. That activity would have an output, and that output will have an outcome. If you don't do that, whether it's a pilot project for UNICEF or whether it's a line item in a government budget, you really should be asking questions about why that's in the budget for the first place. Why is the money being spent if it won't affect the outcomes? You know, we need to spend money on teacher salaries to hire teachers. What's the outcome? We want better PISA scores. We want better, primary education. Money for vaccinations, which will have an impact on prevalence of polio. Very clear. It's next week. I'll run a mini session on this if anyone's interested. I'd also like to congratulate you all for still sticking around. It's very impressive. Next question. Education sector in Togo has a huge wage bill, but this may be the example from Togo, that the majority of the budget is taken up by the wage bill. But in many countries, in many ministries, wages take up a significant part of these these partner line ministry budgets. So as a UNICEF country office, it would be useful for you to look at what proportion of your line ministry budgets are spent on wages, because that is somewhere where you're going to see how much flexibility that a ministry actually has in order to, change what they spend the money on, incorporate new policies, etc. Okay, a very big thing that everyone talks about is the IFIs and the usual suspects, and that they have a PFM mandate. True in many ways. However, they don't normally work with the line ministries. The line ministries typically have the lowest capacity, and the World Bank and the UNDP cannot do everything. Now, of course, you may want to, as Arta mentioned, work with the World Bank or UNDP and say, look, we would like to support the Ministry for Women's Affairs in their budget submissions. There's no point two different institutions doing this. It's a waste of money, and it won't have a very successful outcome. But the most important thing is to remember that most of the time line ministries are overlooked, which is why they have poor budgets and which is why they have weak budget submissions. And at UNICEF, you actually know your line ministries best. So work with the people you know. Of course, you will have to engage with the Ministry of Finance, which is something Beatrice mentioned, and it's a critical entry point. But engaging with the Ministry of Finance is, as Albert explained, when you say to them more needs to be spent on children, find out the reasons the Ministry of Finance are basically saying, no. Hear it from them and then work with your partner ministries, and then go back to the Ministry of Finance and look for ways to improve and to strengthen your partners. And the final thing is, someone asked a question about why money wasn't allocated or not spent, and someone else mentioned budget execution and disbursement. In many countries, it's absorptive capacity. So basically that means many of these line ministries simply do not have the ability to spend the monies once it hits their budgets. Again, it's a capacity issue. Again, the traditional IFIs, the World Bank, they will deal with disbursement issues in the Ministry of Finance before they deal with disbursement issues in line ministries. So more often than not, money allocated to line ministries is not spent. Maybe that's 50%, maybe that's 70%. Maybe it's all spent in December, when your budget cycle, for example, if we look at the US, is your January to December. Maybe it's lumpy. Maybe it's poorly costed. Maybe they actually really don't know how much it costs to do these things. And then someone mentioned school year alignment. Well, in all honesty, almost no countries align their budgets with the school year. This comes down to the fact that every country's budget cycle varies slightly. And that was my point in my presentation when I said, for example, in Indonesia, if you are a UNICEF office and you wish to commission research, this research needs to be completed by the end of February, because from March to June, they're the months when the line ministries are going to be working on their budget submissions, giving them to the Ministry of Finance, incorporating changes. This is for the 2016 budget. This is not for this year. So when you ask a question which says, well, how do we align the budget with the school year? You don't. It's all forward planning. And this is why your MTEF is so important. The school year happens every year. It's not new. It's not a new initiative. New initiatives are different and slightly more difficult and complex. But you should be able to write the budget and know when monies should be dispersed for a school year, for teachers, for books, for new buildings. When would you build new buildings? Right. So that was my wrap up. Who would like to go first to respond? We have Albert. Albert? Okay, we're unmuting you, and if you have comments.
I don't have any more comments on what you have, because I think most of the question I wanted to answer, you have done it. So for me, I think it's quite okay with what you have said. So I don't have no more comments. Maybe if there are some specific questions related to Togo, I will come after. But for the moment, for me, it's okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fernanda, would you like to add some comments or? Fernanda, Erika? Okay.
No, we don't have any further comments. We totally agree for what you said. Thank you.
You don't have to totally agree. But it's nice. Okay, Arta, would you like to add anything further?
No, thank you.
Oh, wow.
I think it's...
Right, so we've got all our presenters in submission. Elena Gaia, are you still there in Geneva? No? Okay, so we've lost Elena. I would like to congratulate all of you for, lasting. Beatrice, do you have some more comments?
Hello?
Yep. You have the mic.
All right, thanks. No, I think you covered very well everything, and actually, thank you very much. It was a very, very informative session, very useful for us. Maybe just one point. I wrote that in the chat, so maybe there is no need. But since I'm here, we have been talking a lot about countries with MTEF, but not all countries have. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, because I'm getting some windows. Anyway, not all countries have MTEF, especially post-conflict countries or, fragile, whatever they're called, fragile countries. But the same rules and the same concepts that you've been so clearly explaining still apply. There is still a budget cycle. There is still plenty of opportunities for UNICEF offices to make a difference with line ministries, with the Ministry of Finance at the different stages of the budget cycle. That's all, just as more remark. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Beatrice. No, I totally agree. As we mentioned, 2/3 of countries had MTEFs in 2008. It's an increasing, the current fashion. It's where most countries are headed to. Of course, if you're a post-conflict country, I worked in Afghanistan for a long time. The first thing we did was not to start an MTEF. We wanted to start an annual budget process. But what you see, as Beatrice just mentioned, is that you integrate it first of all within the budget process, and then as Arta and Albert mentioned, and Togo is a fragile state, ensure that you become part of the MTEF process when and if it doesn't happen. Okay, someone asked a question on costing for child protection. I understand that we do have, I think, child protection benchmarking work. We'll be able to share that with you, but if you could please post the same question on the community of practice so we can send you the link and upload it. On the question on decentralization, the next webinar is actually on decentralization, local governance, and particularly on IGTs, and that's the way the money transfers from the central to the subnational levels. I see one more question before I'm being told that you all have to get back to your real jobs, although I'm very glad that you've all stayed. Best approach in a highly centralized budget cycle. Sorry, I'm just reading. Okay, right, Nigeria. Thank you for joining. You've missed 2 hours, but the great news is for the fantastic news is we've recorded it all, and it will be posted to the community of practice. But Mohammed, we're super enthused you joined us. Pakistan, I think it'll be very useful for you, particularly the decentralization webinar, because for those of you who don't know, under Pakistan's 18th constitutional amendment, allocation was basically given to the provinces. So why I mentioned that very briefly is depending on the country, the budget may be linked to the constitution, and this makes changes in the budget very difficult. Finally, 2 pieces of housekeeping. Everyone has been sent the questionnaire for the Public Finance for Children Global Learning Program, which will be launched in September of this year. However, we've only received out of 460 emails about 20 responses. So we would very much like you to complete the questionnaire so that what you want in the training can actually be put in the training. Otherwise, you have a situation like today where I talk about what I think you would like to hear. And the final point is please post any further questions on the community of practice discussion site. And as you know, the PPTs are uploaded. French documentation, we will work on this, Mehdi, we have it, and also we can get the Albert and I can translate his PPT into French for you, as well as the first PPT. And again, thank you all for joining, and thank you very, very much for staying. 2 hours of public finance is very impressive.
Thank you, everyone.